300 candles burned above her head. Rebecca did not see a single one. The mating ball had begun. She could hear it through the stone. Music that cost more than her entire life. Laughter shaped by people who had never once been afraid of the dark. Silk gowns crossing marble floors. The sound of it moved through the ceiling above her like a language she had been forbidden to learn. Every noble daughter in the kingdom was up there tonight, arranged, positioned, dressed in colors that cost more than Rebecca would earn in 10 years of service. They had been preparing for this night for months, some of them for years. Mothers coaching daughters on how to stand, how to smile, how to be exactly what a king might want without appearing to try. Rebecca was in the cellar, and the worst part was she had not even seen it coming. Iron at her wrists, not just cold, the kind of cold that finds the bone and refuses to leave. Every small movement sent a faint metallic sound off the stone walls, a quiet, persistent reminder that the chains were there, even when she tried to forget them. A single candle burned on the floor 3 feet away. She understood immediately that it was not placed there out of kindness. Total darkness might cause panic. Panic might cause noise, and noise on a night like this, with this many important people moving through the rooms above, noise would be a problem. Lady Celeste did not tolerate problems she had not already solved. That was the thing about her. She did not act from cruelty alone. She acted from precision. The chains, the cellar, the single candle, all of it calculated, all of it decided in advance. This was not a reaction made in the heat of an evening. This was a plan. Lady Celeste had come for Rebecca 4 hours before the first guest arrived. No explanation. There never was. 2 members of staff appeared at Rebecca's door with the quiet efficiency of people carrying out an instruction given well in advance. The chains had already been prepared. That detail settled into Rebecca's chest like a stone dropping into still water. The preparation, the forethought. Someone had looked at this night weeks ago, perhaps months ago, and decided that Rebecca needed to be removed from it before it began. Not punished, not dismissed, removed. There was a difference. Punishment implied she had done something wrong. This was something else entirely. Lady Celeste was not afraid of what Rebecca had done. She was afraid of what might happen if the right person happened to see her. Rebecca sat with that knowledge in the cold and turned it over carefully. It did not comfort her. It frightened her more.
She had been brought to this estate at 8 years old. No family, no explanation beyond the bare minimum. Her parents were gone. There was nowhere else for her to go. The estate needed staff, and she needed a roof. Lady Celeste had looked her over once, the way you assess something practical rather than something human, then nodded. That had been the beginning, the middle, everything in between. Years of stone floors and early mornings, of making herself useful and making herself quiet, and making herself, above all, invisible. She had learned that invisibility was the only currency a girl in her position actually owned. The less she was noticed, the safer she was. The smaller she made herself, the less she gave anyone a reason to remind her how small she already was. She had become very good at disappearing, which made tonight's arrangements almost something she might have laughed at if she had been in any condition to find things funny. The candle flickered. There was no draft, No open window, no gap beneath the door. The flame simply bent sideways, just slightly, just for a moment, as though something in the air above the cellar had shifted. Rebecca opened her eyes and looked at it. The flame steadied. The room returned to its usual cold stillness. She shook it off, closed her eyes again, felt the fear building in her chest the way it always did in small, dark spaces with no visible exits. Not sharp and sudden, slow, a rising pressure behind her ribs that had nowhere to go. She had spent years learning to manage fear like that, to find something to hold on to when the walls felt too close and the silence felt too loud, and her own mind became the thing she most needed to escape. She had only ever found one thing that worked. She opened her mouth. The song that came out was not chosen. It arrived the way breath arrives, necessary, automatic, the body doing what the body knows how to do when the mind has run out of options. Low at first, almost nothing, just a thread of sound in a cold room that had probably never heard anything like it. Then fuller, then filling the entire space the way water fills a container, completely, finding every corner, leaving no part of the room untouched. Her voice had always done that. She had never understood why. Other people sang, and the sound stayed near them, stayed reasonable, stayed the appropriate size for a person in a room. When Rebecca sang, the room changed, the air changed, something shifted in the quality of the silence around each note, as though the sound were not simply filling the space, but rearranging it. She had learned young not to let people hear her do it. She sang because the fear had nowhere else to go. She sang because the chains were real, and the candle was small, and the ceiling above her held 300 people who did not know she existed. Singing was the one thing in that cellar that belonged entirely to her. No one had chained her voice. That had been Lady Celeste's single miscalculation. She had accounted for Rebecca's presence, her visibility, her access to the rooms above. She had not accounted for the sound that a locked door cannot stop. Stone does not hold sound the way wood does. It passes vibration upward and outward with a patience and thoroughness that no lock can prevent. Rebecca's voice moved through the floor of the cellar, through the foundation of the estate, upward through the walls and into the corridor above, the long stone corridor that no one used anymore, the one that led from the old part of the house down to the wine cellar. The corridor where, at that precise moment, a man had just stopped walking. Nicholas had smiled at 11 women in the last hour. He had meant none of it. He was good at this. That was the problem. Good enough that no one in the room could tell the difference between his genuine attention and his performed attention. He had spent enough years performing it that the performance had become its own kind of fluency. He moved through the mating ball with the ease of someone who understood exactly what was expected and delivered it without friction. What no one in that room understood, what he had never given anyone reason to suspect, was that the alpha king they were all watching so carefully had been searching for something he could not name for longer than he cared to admit. Not a political arrangement, not an alliance, something older than either. Something his wolf had been pulling toward for months with a restlessness that had no direction and no resolution. until tonight. He did not know that yet, but his wolf did. Lady Celeste was the finest operator in the room. She knew it. Everyone knew it. She had placed Vivienne in his path 4 times in the last 90 minutes, each approach so naturally timed, so elegantly staged, that a less observant man would have believed every one of them was coincidence. Vivienne was poised. Vivienne was gracious. Vivienne smiled at him with the precise warmth of someone who had rehearsed that smile until it no longer looked rehearsed. Nicholas smiled back, said the correct things, moved on. He was aware of Lady Celeste tracking his movement from across the room, that particular quality of attention that powerful people give to situations they are managing. He recognized the technique without taking it personally. She wanted this alliance. She had worked for it. He almost respected the execution. Almost. What he could not locate anywhere in the evening, in any of the careful arrangements Lady Celeste had constructed, was a single reason to want any of it himself. He was standing near the east window when it reached him, glass in hand, watching the room with the patient attention of a man who has learned that observation is its own form of participation. The orchestra playing, the crowd moving, the entire evening running exactly as designed. Then, beneath all of it, something else. Not the orchestra. The orchestra had been playing for 2 hours and had produced in him precisely nothing beyond a mild appreciation for technical skill. This was different. This was beneath the floor. A sound so faint he should not have been able to separate it from the noise of 300 people and 40 musicians. But he did, instantly. The way you hear your name spoken quietly across a loud room, not because it is the loudest sound, but because something in you was already listening for it, already waiting, without knowing it was waiting. His wolf went still. Not calm, still. There is a difference, and that difference, right now, in this room, on this night, was everything. Calm is what happens when there is nothing to respond to. Still is what happens when everything in you locks onto a single point and refuses to move. Nicholas's wolf had been restless for months, searching, pulling in no particular direction with no particular purpose. He had managed it, contained it, told himself it was the pressure of the season, the weight of the negotiations, the fatigue of being needed by everyone for everything without pause. He had been wrong. He understood that now with a clarity that required no deliberation. The restlessness had not been purposeless, it had been directional, pointing at something he had not yet encountered, waiting for a frequency it would recognize on contact. The frequency was beneath the floor. He looked down at the glass in his hand, set it on the nearest surface without watching where it landed. Behind him, Lady Celeste was already moving. He could feel the shift in the room her approach always created. Vivienne a half step behind her, the entire plan about to make its 5th careful attempt. He turned. He walked, not toward the door, toward the stairs that went down. The most powerful man in the kingdom was following a sound through the floor, and below that floor, Rebecca had no idea he was coming. The corridor below was exactly as he remembered it. He had not been down here in years, not since he was young enough that escaping the pressure of becoming who everyone needed him to become required an actual physical location. A room, a place that did not know his title and did not care about it. The wine cellar at the end of this corridor had been that place. Not officially, not by any arrangement anyone acknowledged, but in the way children claim spaces, by returning to them, by needing them, by leaving something of themselves in the walls. He had needed it often as a boy. The sound was stronger here, clearer, still coming through the stone floor but no longer deniable, no longer something he could attribute to the orchestra or the crowd or his own tired mind manufacturing things to explain the restlessness. A voice, a human voice, singing in the dark beneath his feet, with a quality that made the stone corridor feel like a different kind of place than it had 30 seconds ago. He kept walking, because everything in him, the man and the wolf, for once without argument, already knew what the walking was for.
He pushed the cellar door open. He did not announce himself. He simply opened the door and looked at what was there. The door swung inward. Cold air. The smell of old oak and stone, and something warmer beneath both. And her. Brown skin warm in the single candle's light, the way warm things look more vivid against cold surroundings, more present, more undeniable. Eyes closed, chains at her wrists. He registered the chains with a stillness that was its own form of response, filed the information away to be addressed, not reacted to. Back against a barrel, hands resting in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who has decided stillness is the safest available option. Singing. Not performing, not projecting, singing the way people sing when they are completely certain no one is listening, with everything, with nothing held back, with the kind of honesty that only exists in rooms a person believes are private. Nicholas stood in the doorway. He did not move, he did not speak, he simply looked, because this was a moment that deserved to be looked at before anything else was done to it. He looked at the candlelight on her face, the way it moved across her brown skin, warm and unsteady, landing on her features with a quality that made the cold room feel like it had a center. Her expression was not what he might have expected. She did not look afraid. She did not look resigned. She looked present, entirely, privately, completely present in the music she was making, the way people look when they have found the one thing that makes the surrounding circumstances temporarily irrelevant. He watched the slight rise and fall of her chest with each phrase, watched her brow shift almost imperceptibly with the emotional weight of a note, watched a person be completely, entirely themselves in a space they believed was empty. He had not seen that in a very long time. People were rarely entirely themselves around him. There was always the awareness of who he was, always the small adjustments people made in his presence, the careful management of what they showed. He had grown so used to it that he had nearly forgotten what its absence looked like. This was its absence. Only when the last note faded into the stone did he step inside. He crossed the room without hurry. This was not a moment that benefited from speed. Everything in him understood that. The man and the wolf both, for once, in complete agreement. Speed would startle her. Speed would make this about urgency rather than intention. And his intention, which had clarified somewhere between the corridor and the doorway, was simple: to close the distance, to be in the same room as the person his entire being had just rearranged itself around, to do it without making her feel the way she had clearly been made to feel by whatever had put her in this cellar, like a problem. He would not make her feel like a problem. He reached her. He looked at the chains,
at the marks they had already left on her brown wrists, the evidence of hours of contact with iron that had no business being there. He did not speak. He did not ask permission for what he did next. It was not the kind of thing that required permission. He broke the chains, and in that moment, though neither of them had spoken a single word yet, everything that Lady Celeste had spent months constructing began, quietly and irrevocably, to come apart. The iron fell away. Rebecca's eyes opened. She had heard him cross the room. She had known, in the way people who have spent years alert to approaching footsteps always know, that someone was there. She had kept her eyes closed anyway, not from denial, from the instinct of someone buying one more second of the only peace available to her. Then the chains were gone. She looked at her own wrists first, at the marks the iron had left on her brown skin, dark against warm, the record of hours she could not take back. Then she looked up. He was already there, already kneeling, not above her, level with her, which was not what kings did, which was not what anyone did with servants, which was not something she had any framework for processing in the middle of everything else she was trying to process. Gold eyes, close, watching her with an attention that was not assessment, not pity, not any of the things she had learned to brace for when powerful people looked at her directly. She did not have a word for what it was. She had never needed the word before. Before he spoke, before she spoke, before anything else, he took her freed wrists in both hands, not examining them, not displaying concern in the performed way of someone managing a situation, simply holding them. His hands were warm. She had not expected that. It seemed like a small thing to notice in the middle of everything. It was somehow the detail that reached her most directly, the warmth of his hands around her wrists in a room that had been cold for hours. His thumbs moved, slowly, across the marks the chains had left on her brown skin, not wiping at them, not trying to erase them, moving across them with a steadiness that said, "I see this. I am not looking away from it. I am not in a hurry to get past it." Nothing was said. The candle burned. The stone held the silence. The Alpha King knelt on a cold cellar floor and held a servant woman's hands in the dark, and did not seem to find anything about that arrangement worth rushing through. Neither did she. Eventually he spoke. "Your name." Low. Not a command. Something closer to a request from a man who did not make many of them, offered without pressure, without the implicit weight of authority that usually lived inside every sentence out of his mouth. She looked at him for a moment before answering, not stalling, deciding. "Rebecca." Her voice came out steadier than she expected, steadier than she felt. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she normally wasn't. Not racing, just present. Each beat slightly more deliberate than the last, as though her body were paying attention to something it did not want to miss. He said it once. "Rebecca." Quietly. The way you say a word that has just revealed what it belongs to, not repeating it for confirmation, not trying it on, saying it the way you say something that has clicked into place, with the particular stillness of a person receiving information that rearranges things. She felt it when he said it, in her chest, which made no logical sense, and every other kind. She looked at him then, really looked. not at the authority he carried, though it was there, it was always there with men like him, woven into the way they occupied space. Not at the gold eyes the whole kingdom found significant enough to mention in the same breath as his name. Not at the title he had not used once since stepping through that door. She looked at the man, the one who had left a ballroom full of people waiting and walked down a corridor he remembered from childhood and pushed open a door and crossed a cold room and knelt on a stone floor, without hesitation, without explanation, without any visible concern for what any of it looked like from the outside. The one who had not once made her feel like a complication. In all her years of service, she could count on one hand the people who had managed that. The bond arrived without announcement. No sharp shift, no signal, simply a second heartbeat establishing itself alongside her own, steady, certain, already familiar in a way that should have been impossible. The restlessness she had sensed in him, beneath the stillness, beneath the patience, even in the cellar, went quiet. It had found what it was looking for. It had stopped moving. The ball continued above them. She could still hear it through the stone, the orchestra playing on, 300 people waiting, Lady Celeste managing, Vivian positioned, the whole careful architecture of the evening holding itself in place around an absence no one had publicly named yet. Neither of them moved. Neither of them wanted to. Rebecca sat with the bond settling into her like something permanent and tried to understand what it meant that the most dangerous night of her life had produced the first moment in recent memory where she felt entirely, solidly safe. Then, from directly above, closer than before, came the sharp, precise sound of heels crossing marble, stopping. A pause with intention inside it, the kind of pause that belongs to someone who has just confirmed what they suspected and is now deciding what to do about it. Then Lady Celeste's voice, carrying down through the stone with the clarity of a woman who chose exactly how far her voice traveled. Find him, now, quietly. Rebecca's eyes went to Nicholas. He was already on his feet. He did not rush. He never rushed. She was beginning to understand that about him. But he moved with the total directional focus of someone who has received information and is already several steps into deciding what to do with it. His gold eyes went to the door, to the ceiling, back to her, taking in the room the way someone takes in a situation they intend to resolve rather than endure. The cellar door was locked from the outside. She knew this because she had heard the lock turn 4 hours ago and had been aware of it every minute since. Whatever key existed for that door was somewhere above them, in the possession of someone who answered to Lady Celeste, not someone who was going to use it in their favor. Above them, footsteps. More than one set now, moving with purpose through the corridors of the floor above, spreading out in the organized pattern of a search that had been planned for the contingency of something going wrong. Lady Celeste had prepared for this, too. Of course she had. Nicholas looked at Rebecca. His expression was not alarm. It was the focused calm of a man who has already decided how this ends. "Stay close," he said quietly. Rebecca did not yet know what Nicholas intended, but she felt it in the shift of the air around him, the way the room changed quality when he stopped being patient and became purposeful. He moved to the cellar door, the locked, solid, heavy door that had held her for 4 hours. He tested it once with his hand, not with force. a single push, gauging resistance, measuring the problem before deciding how to address it. Then he addressed it. The door opened. Not dramatically, nothing splintered, there was no display. It simply yielded, the way things yield to a pressure they were not built to withstand from the person applying it. The lock gave. The door swung inward. Nicholas stood in the frame of it and looked back at her with an expression that suggested this had been a minor logistical issue, a small inconvenience between where they were and where they were going. He held out his hand. She looked at it for 1 second, 1 breath. Then she took it, and they went up. The ballroom greeted them with silence. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of 300 people stopping everything simultaneously. Conversations mid-sentence, glasses halfway to mouths, laughter ending before it finished. The orchestra lost the thread of the music somewhere in the first measure after they appeared in the doorway. The final notes faded out with the peculiar awkwardness of an ending that was not planned. Every eye turned. Rebecca felt the weight of it, all that attention landing on her at once, 300 pairs of eyes adjusting to the sight of her. She was in her servant's dress. Her hair was not arranged. The marks from the chains were still visible on her brown wrists, because marks like that do not disappear in the time it takes to climb a staircase. She stood in the center of the most important room in the estate, looking exactly like what she was, nothing like what any of them had arranged their evening around. Nicholas stood beside her. He did not appear to find anything about this worth apologizing for. Lady Celeste moved before anyone else did. This was not surprising. She had been moving before everyone else in every room she had entered for 20 years. It was her primary skill, and she had refined it into something close to an art form, the ability to reach the center of a developing situation before it had time to develop in a direction she had not chosen. She crossed the ballroom floor with the unhurried grace of someone who has never once needed to appear hurried. Her expression was composed. Her posture was perfect. She was, Rebecca noted with exhausted recognition, completely magnificent at this. She began to speak. "A misunderstanding," she said. Her voice was warm with practiced concern. The girl had wandered somewhere she should not have been. These things happened in large households. Staff could become confused about boundaries. It was no one's fault. The Alpha King, ever patient, ever generous, had simply been kind enough to escort her back. It was an excellent construction. Around the edges of the room, Rebecca could see people beginning to nod, beginning to accept it, beginning to let the story Lady Celeste was building replace the one they had just witnessed with their own eyes. Rebecca felt the old reflex rising. She knew it well, had lived inside it her entire life. The instinct that said, "Make yourself smaller, step back, let the room rearrange itself around the powerful people in it. Find whatever corner remains and stay there quietly until the danger passes." It had kept her safe more times than she could count. It had also kept her in chains, in a cellar on the most important night of the year, while 300 people danced above her head. Safety and disappearance had always been the same thing for her. She was tired of the corner, tired of the quiet, tired of shrinking herself down to a size that made other people comfortable. She looked down at her own hand, brown skin, the marks still visible at her wrist. She looked at his hand beside hers, close, not touching, waiting for nothing, demanding nothing, simply there. She thought about the cellar, the candlelight, his thumbs on her wrists. She thought about what it had felt like to be held carefully by someone who came looking. She reached out. Her fingers closed around his hand, in front of everyone. No speech, no announcement, just her, choosing in public to stay. Nicholas looked down at their joined hands, then slowly at her face. What moved through his expression was not authority, not the satisfaction of a situation resolving in his favor, not the composed dignity of a king managing a public moment with appropriate gravity. It was relief, pure, unguarded, entirely unsuitable for public display, displayed anyway. The expression of a man who had been carrying something very tightly for a very long time, and had just been given permission to set it down. She had not expected that. She had expected the gold-eyed certainty the whole kingdom described when they talked about him. She had not expected to see, in front of 300 people in a candle-lit ballroom, a man who looked like he had just confirmed something he had stopped believing he would ever find. He showed it anyway. He did not seem to mind who saw. Lady Celeste had stopped speaking. The room had the particular quality of a space in which something has shifted in a way that cannot be shifted back. People who had been nodding were no longer nodding. The story Lady Celeste had been building so carefully had just lost its footing beneath her. Nicholas turned to face the room. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Rooms adjusted to him, had always adjusted to him, the way aces adjust to things that carry genuine weight. He spoke in the tone of a man describing a fact rather than making an argument, not performing conviction, simply reporting what was true. He spoke pack law. His wolf had chosen. The law governing that choice had existed longer than every title in the room, longer than every alliance, longer than every arrangement made in drawing rooms over careful conversation and measured ambition. The law was not a preference. It was not a tradition that could be reframed or renegotiated or politely set aside in favor of a more convenient outcome. It simply was. He said it in 11 words. The silence that followed was different from any silence that had come before it that evening. Not the silence of a room waiting, the silence of a room that has just received information and does not yet know what to do with it. Rebecca's hand remained in his through all of it. She did not let go. Neither did he. Lady Celeste held his gaze. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. The room watched. Rooms always watch these moments, the space between when something is said and when the person it is directed at decides how to receive it. That half-second before the response is constructed, when the actual interior state of a person is briefly, involuntarily visible. What was visible in Lady Celeste's face was not grief, not humiliation, not the collapse of a woman whose plan had failed. It was adjustment, the quiet recalibration of a person who has just lost one position and is already, invisibly, without any outward signal, identifying the next. Her eyes moved, just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, to Rebecca. Not with anger, not with anything as readable or as human as anger. With assessment. She was already measuring something, already calculating distances. Whatever the calculation was, it had begun before Nicholas finished speaking, and it was not finished yet. That was worse than anger. Anger exhausts itself. Calculation does not. Calculation simply waits for a better moment. Vivian had not looked up from the floor in some time. She did not look up now. Her hands were folded in front of her with a stillness that suggested she had made a private decision, somewhere in the last few minutes, quietly and without announcement, to simply be present in the room without participating in it. She was not performing composure. She was doing something more difficult. She was simply waiting for the moment to be over. Rebecca looked at her once, only once. She did not know exactly what she felt. It was too large and too complicated, and too much was happening simultaneously to sort through with any accuracy. But she noted it. The girl in the silk dress, who had not chosen any of this, standing in the ruins of her mother's plan, waiting for the floor to stop moving. The court watched everything, the way courts always do. Nothing that happened in that room tonight would stay in that room. It would travel. It would become the story people told tomorrow, the day after, for years. And in every version of that story, there would be a brown-skinned woman in a servant's dress, standing in the center of the ballroom, holding the Alpha King's hand while Lady Celeste recalculated her future in real time. Lady Celeste smiled. It arrived on her face with the precision of something chosen rather than felt, selected from a collection of available responses because it was the most effective one for this particular moment. It was not the smile of a woman who had accepted defeat. It was not the smile of a woman who had given anything up. "Of course," she said. Her voice was smooth, even, completely controlled. "The law is the law." She inclined her head, clasped her hands, stepped back. The room exhaled. Around the edges of the ballroom, the careful process of returning to normal began, quiet conversations resuming, glasses lifted, the orchestra tentatively finding its way back to the beginning of something, the machinery of the evening attempting to reassemble itself around what had just happened. Rebecca watched Lady Celeste step back and thought about the cellar, about chains prepared in advance, about a plan made weeks before tonight for a contingency that had been considered and prepared for with the thoroughness of someone who leaves nothing to chance. She had lost tonight. That was not the same as being finished, and Rebecca, who had spent her entire life learning to read the difference between those two things, knew it.
The inner hall was smaller than the ballroom, more honest. 7 candles, 7 elders arranged in a quiet arc, their faces carrying the particular expression of people witnessing something significant and being careful not to disturb it. The stone walls held the silence differently here, not the performing silence of a public room, but the working silence of a space that has held ceremonies like this before and knows how to carry them. Rebecca stood in the center of it, in her servant's dress. She had thought, somewhere between the ballroom and here, that the shift from public confrontation to private ritual might bring some relief, some clarity, at least a reduction in the pressure that had been building in her chest since the cellar door swung open. It had not reduced. It had changed quality, become less like fear and more like standing at the edge of something very large, looking down, understanding that the step you are about to take cannot be untaken. Nicholas stood before her.
He did not speak immediately. He looked at her first, the same way he had looked at her in the cellar doorway, completely, without rushing past it, without treating it as a preamble to something more important. Then he told her she had a choice, plainly, without ceremony, without the careful framing of a man managing a situation toward a preferred outcome. He told her that what happened in this room belonged to her, not to the law the elders were here to witness, not to the pack, not to the kingdom that would know about this by morning. He said he would walk away if she asked, that she was allowed to want this for herself, that she was equally allowed to want something different, that either answer would be respected, that he would spend the rest of his life meaning that. Rebecca was quiet. She had been given instructions her entire life, orders, silence that was not a pause but a full stop. She had been given a cellar and chains and a single candle, and the understanding that her presence was a variable someone else had the right to control. She had never been given a choice. The weight of it was almost more than she knew how to hold, not because it was heavy in the wrong direction, but because she had no practice carrying something this shape, no muscle memory for it, no reference point. She stood with it. She let herself feel it, all of it. She thought about the cellar, the candlelight on cold stone, the song she had sung to no one, to the dark, to the simple need to survive one more hour in a place she had not chosen and could not leave. She thought about the candle flame bending sideways with no draft, the change in pressure that arrived before she knew what it meant, the first sign that something had shifted before she was aware of the shifting. She thought about his hands on her wrists, warm in a cold room, thumbs moving slowly across the marks the iron had left on her brown skin, not erasing them, acknowledging them. The steady presence of someone not in a hurry to move past her pain to the part of the story that was more convenient. She thought about the ballroom, her own hand reaching for his, the most frightening thing she had ever done, the most entirely hers. She looked at him. She said yes, simply, completely, without qualification or performance, or the careful hedging of someone who has learned that wanting things openly is an invitation to have them taken. Just yes. The bond sealed with a sensation she had no existing language for, not sharp, not frightening, something closer to recognition, a door her body had been holding shut her entire life, swinging open, not forced, not broken down, simply released, because it had finally been given permission. The bond moved through her like warmth, finding rooms that have been cold for a long time. She felt it settle into her like something structural, a second spine establishing itself alongside the first, equally load-bearing, permanent in a way that asked nothing of her except that she stop pretending she did not feel it. She felt his wolf through the bond, warm, certain, no longer restless, no longer that directionless searching energy she had sensed in him even in the cellar, beneath the stillness, beneath the patience. It had arrived, it had found what it was looking for, and it had stopped moving. The relief of it came through the bond as clearly as anything she had ever felt in her own chest. She understood, standing in the inner hall with the candles burning and the elders watching, that nothing before this moment had been the actual beginning. This was. She would have stayed in that understanding indefinitely. The elders did not allow it. They had been conferring in the corner since shortly after the bond settled, quietly, with the careful body language of people processing something unexpected. Rebecca had noticed them without knowing why, something in the quality of their stillness, the specific avoidance of people discussing the person in the room and not wanting that person to know yet what is being discussed. Nicholas noticed before she could ask. He crossed to them. The conversation was brief. When he turned back, his expression had changed, not alarmed, not afraid, something more precise than either, the look of a man receiving information that does not frighten him, but requires him to rearrange his understanding of several things at once. He came back to her. He told her the elders needed to speak with her, in the morning, after she had rested. She told him to say it now. He looked at her for a moment, that complete, unhurried attention she had come to recognize as his version of care, and then he said it. Her voice, he told her, was not an accident, and what came next would change everything either of them thought they understood about how this night had begun. Her voice was not an accident. The elders did not believe it was simply something she had been born with in the ordinary way that people are born with gifts. They believed it was written into her blood at birth, deliberately, with intention, not a gift given randomly, a signal designed with a specific recipient, a frequency that could only ever reach one wolf, one particular wolf, the one standing in front of her. Someone had known, before either of them existed. Someone had looked at what was coming and built this into her before she took her first breath. A call that no lock could stop, no cellar could contain, no carefully arranged social evening could silence. Lady Celeste had put her beneath a ballroom and locked the door. The voice had gone through the floor anyway. Nicholas watched her take this in. He did not rush the silence, did not fill it. He gave her what he had given her in the cellar, the space to receive something difficult without being hurried past it. Rebecca stood with all of it. She had been found, and then she had chosen. Those two things together, being found and then choosing, felt like the whole story, except that somewhere on the other side of the estate a light was still burning. Lady Celeste sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes on nothing, that same precise smile on her face, the one that had nothing to do with acceptance and everything to do with what comes next. She had known about the voice, she had known what it meant, she had known for years, which meant the chains had never been about stopping Rebecca from being found. They had been about something else entirely, something that would not become clear until morning, something that when it did would change everything, for Rebecca, for Nicholas, and for every careful plan Lady Celeste had spent years building toward a single, patient, inevitable end. The night was not over, it was only just beginning.